The Galactic Council's dark secret. In the heart of the galaxy, the Galactic Council convened, a massive, gleaming hall filled with representatives from countless planets, each species more different than the last. Aliens with scales, tentacles, and shimmering skins sat in their grand chairs, listening to the Council's discussions about the future of the galaxy. Among them, a single human girl, Leela, sat quietly. She was the only human representative in a room full of beings far older and more powerful than Earth itself. But Leela had earned her seat. Her bravery and quick thinking had gained her respect among even the most skeptical of species. Despite her youth, Leela was aware of the significance of this moment. Her species had never been invited to sit in the council chambers before. Humanity had only just begun to make its mark on the galaxy, and now they were a part of something much larger. But for all the prestige that came with the position, there was something unsettling about the council, something Leela couldn't quite put her finger on. The council meeting began, and Leela listened as representatives discussed trade agreements, military strategies, and planetary borders. But as the meeting went on, a growing unease filled the air. Leela could see the shift in the atmosphere. It was as if something important was being ignored or deliberately left out of the conversation. The discussions turned to the treatment of certain creatures from several planets. Leela noticed the way the alien representatives spoke when mentioning these creatures, like they were beneath them. There was a cruelty in their words that made Leela's stomach twist. One council member, an alien with multiple eyes and sharp claws, stood up to speak. His name was Krog, and his species was known for their cold, calculating nature. He began to discuss the incident, but as he did, his tone became guarded. "We must not let this matter distract us," Krog said, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. "The creatures in question are expendable." Leela's heart skipped a beat. Expendable? What could they mean by that? She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. She couldn't ignore what she was hearing. The creatures they were talking about, these expendable beings, were not just animals. They were sentient beings, she knew. Leela had read about them in her briefings, creatures from various planets who had been captured and enslaved. But no one seemed to care. Not even the other council members who were now shifting in their seats, pretending to be interested in other matters. The council tried to move past the subject quickly, but Leela couldn't shake the words from her mind. Expendable. It was a word that haunted her, and she felt a deep chill settle in her bones. She had to know more. Later that evening, when the council meeting ended, Leela slipped away from the grand chamber. She knew she couldn't just sit back and pretend she hadn't heard what she did. Her curiosity drove her to the council's archives, a vast underground network filled with millions of files and records from across the galaxy. The corridors were dark and silent, except for the soft hum of the energy-powered lights overhead. Leela moved quickly, her footsteps echoing in the quiet halls. She reached the records room, a massive chamber filled with rows upon rows of databanks. Her fingers danced across the screen as she searched for the files on the incident Krog had mentioned. After several minutes of searching, she found a file labeled Project Dominion. Leela's breath caught in her throat. She had heard whispers about Project Dominion. It was said to be a highly classified program, one that the council did not speak of in public. With trembling hands, she opened the file. The first page was a report, dated only a few months ago. The words on the screen made Leela's heart race. The document described the systematic capture and enslavement of highly intelligent animals from various planets. They were being used for gladiatorial combat, forced into arenas to fight for the entertainment of the galaxy's elite. The animals were not just victims of cruelty. They were sentient, capable of speech and thought. But none of that mattered to the council. The report detailed the money the council made from these fights, how it was a thriving business that many of the council members profited from. The animals were bred for battle, kept in cages, and forced to fight until they were either killed or deemed useless. It was a cycle of endless suffering, all hidden under layers of bureaucracy and secrecy. Leela couldn't believe what she was reading. She felt sick to her stomach. The creatures weren't just enslaved. They were treated as mere entertainment, discarded once they outlived their usefulness. It was cruelty on a scale that Lila could hardly comprehend. Her hand shook as she scrolled through the file. There were images, too. Images of the animals, their faces filled with fear and pain, their eyes pleading for mercy that would never come. The creatures were forced into brutal combat, their bodies broken by the sheer violence of the fights. It was a sickening display, one that Lila knew could not continue. But now that she knew, she was faced with a terrible question. What could one human girl do against the most powerful council in the galaxy? How could she fight a system so entrenched in cruelty, one that reached across entire star systems? Lila closed the file, her mind racing. She had to do something. The truth had to come out. But in a council so vast and filled with powerful beings, Lila knew she was alone. The weight of the truth was heavy, but it was a burden she couldn't ignore. She would have to be careful. She would have to move quickly. The council wouldn't let her get away with this for long. But she wasn't afraid. Lila was determined to make them listen. She would be the one to expose their dark secret, even if it meant putting her own life at risk. A plan for justice. Lila paced back and forth in her small, dimly lit quarters on the outskirts of the Galactic Council's capital. The weight of the truth she had uncovered pressed heavily on her shoulders. She couldn't stop thinking about the file she had found, the images of the tortured animals, and the chilling words of the council members who had casually discussed their suffering. It was all too much to bear. She had to act. But how? The council was powerful, and they held the fate of entire civilizations in their hands. One young human girl, no matter how determined, stood little chance against them. But Lila wasn't like most of the beings in the galaxy. She had a fire inside her, a fierce sense of justice that no amount of fear could quench. She knew that if she stayed silent, the cruelty would only continue. The animals would suffer, and no one would lift a finger to stop it. That thought made her blood boil. Lila couldn't stand the thought of more innocent lives being lost. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, but for Lila, time seemed to stretch endlessly. She needed to find allies, beings who would understand the gravity of the situation and share her desire for justice. But the council's influence was everywhere. No one in their right mind would risk entering the most powerful political body in the galaxy. She was alone in this fight. Lila's mind raced, running through every option, every possible strategy. If she wanted to expose the council's dark secret, she couldn't do it from within the council itself. They controlled everything, the media, the resources, and the very information that could spread to the galaxy's inhabitants. But there had to be another way. She needed help, someone who wasn't bound by the council's influence. Then it hit her, the resistance groups. There were whispers of underground movements throughout the galaxy, groups that rejected the council's oppressive rule. They were small, fragmented, and often hunted by the council's enforcers, but they existed. If she could find one of them, maybe, just maybe, they could help her take down the council's operation from the inside. They had to know what was going on. They had to understand the scope of the cruelty. Without wasting another moment, Lila pulled up a hidden communication terminal from beneath her desk, one that wasn't connected to the council's surveillance network. She typed quickly, sending a message to the known resistance contacts. The message was simple, brief, and filled with urgency. I know the council's secret. I need your help. We can expose them. It was a risky move. If the council somehow intercepted the message, she could be caught and silenced before she had a chance to act. But Lila didn't have a choice. She had to try. She had to make a difference. The hours passed in agonizing silence, and just as the sun began to rise over the distant planets, Lila's terminal beeped. A response had arrived. Her heart skipped a beat as she quickly opened the encrypted message. We've been waiting for someone like you. Meet us at coordinates X8727-3. Come alone. Relief flooded through her, followed by a wave of anxiety. This was it. The moment of truth. If she could make it to the resistance, she would have the support she needed to fight back. But there was a catch. She had to go alone. No backup. No guarantees. The risk was high, but Leela knew there was no other way. She couldn't waste time. The coordinates were deep in the outskirts of the galaxy, a place so remote that the Council rarely ventured there. It was the perfect spot for a covert meeting, far from prying eyes. Leela packed a small bag with essentials, a weapon for protection, data pads to document her findings, and most importantly, the file she had uncovered. She couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands. As she prepared to leave, Leela glanced once more at her room. This would be the last time she saw it. If the Council discovered what she was planning, she wouldn't be coming back. But she couldn't allow herself to hesitate. There was too much at stake. She was the only one who knew the truth. If she didn't act now, who would? With a final deep breath, Leela left her quarters and boarded the small transport ship she had requisitioned for the journey. The craft hummed to life, lifting off from the station. As it shot through space, Leela couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and determination. The path ahead was dangerous, and failure wasn't an option. The journey felt long, but Leela finally arrived at the coordinates. The area was desolate, a barren expanse of rock and gas with no signs of life. But hidden within the shadows of a nearby asteroid was a small, nondescript structure, a place of refuge. Lila's pulse quickened as she approached. She had made it. She landed the ship and approached the building cautiously. The door opened with a hiss, revealing a group of figures cloaked in dark robes. They were silent at first, studying her with wary eyes. Lila could feel their suspicion, but she knew they were her only hope. One of them stepped forward, a tall alien with a jagged, armored exoskeleton. His eyes were sharp, and he looked at her like she was an intruder. "What makes you think we can trust you?" he asked in a low, gravelly voice. Leela didn't flinch, "Because I know what the Council is doing, and I'm not afraid to expose them." The alien's eyes narrowed, but then slowly he nodded. "Follow me." As Leela stepped inside, she knew this was just the beginning. She had found Cale didn't respond immediately. He picked up the data pad, scanning the contents quickly. His expression remained unreadable, but Leela could see the subtle tightening of his jaw. She knew he was processing the information, and it wasn't pretty. "I've seen evidence of the Council's corruption before," Cale muttered. "But this is something else." He looked up, meeting Layla's gaze. "What's your plan? How do you expect to take down the most powerful political body in the galaxy with this?" Leela felt the weight of his question. She had thought about this 1,000 times during her journey here. The Council's influence was vast, and they had spies everywhere. They controlled the galaxy's economy, its military, its media. A single act of defiance from a single human seemed like an impossibility. But Leela refused to be intimidated. She couldn't back down now. "I don't know everything," she admitted, "but I know we can't win if we don't try. We need to expose their secrets to the galaxy, get the truth to the people. If they see what's really happening, they'll demand change. The Council won't be able to hide anymore." Cale studied her for a long moment, his eyes flicking to the other members of the Resistance who had gathered around the room. There was a murmur of agreement from a few, but others looked doubtful. Finally, Cale nodded slowly. "All right, we'll help you," he said. "But we'll need a plan. The Council has eyes everywhere. We can't just send this data out blindly." Leela nodded eagerly. "I've already thought of that. There's a broadcast network in the Outer Rim, a neutral zone far from Council surveillance. If we can hack into their system, we can send the data to every corner of the galaxy. Everyone will know the truth." One of the Resistance members, a tall, slender being with bright blue skin, spoke up from the corner. "It won't be easy. The Council has encrypted every communication channel. Getting through won't be simple." Leela's face tightened with determination. "I know it won't be easy, but we don't have time to waste. Every day the Council continues, more creatures suffer. We need to act now." Kale looked at her, then at the others. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Finally, Kale stood up, his decision made. "All right," he said. "We'll help you, but we need to be ready for the worst. If we're going to do this, we do it together. No turning back." Leela's heart soared with relief. She wasn't alone anymore. The resistance was on her side, and together they would expose the Council's horrors to the galaxy. As the planning began, Leela couldn't help but feel the storm brewing in her chest. The Council wouldn't let this go easily. They would fight back with everything they had. But Leela wasn't afraid anymore. As the team began to assemble, Leela couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. They had no choice but to move forward now. The Resistance had thrown everything into this one mission, and there was no turning back. The warship attack would be their first test, but their real goal, the broadcast, was still ahead. And in the heart of that dangerous mission, Leela knew one thing for sure: she couldn't afford to fail. The fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. The warship assault. The time had come. The warship attack was set for the next day, and the tension within the Resistance base had reached a boiling point. Every member of the team was preparing for the most dangerous mission of their lives. But for Leela, it felt as though the weight of the galaxy itself rested on her shoulders. The plan was risky, and every step was fraught with danger. But they had no choice. The Council couldn't be allowed to keep its grip on the galaxy. Leela stood near the command center of the base, looking out the window at the stars. The Fleet-class warship they were targeting was one of the Council's most prized vessels, a symbol of their power. If they succeeded in their attack, the Council would be forced to divert its attention to saving their flagship. It would be the perfect distraction. Just enough time to slip into the broadcast network's facility and send the damning evidence to every corner of the galaxy. Kale approached her, his face unreadable, but with a determination that matched her own. "We're ready," he said quietly. "The warship team is in position, and we've got the best shot we're going to get." Leela nodded, her mind racing. She'd never imagined she would be part of a mission this dangerous. In a way, it felt surreal, like she was watching everything unfold from the outside. But she knew she couldn't afford to hesitate. The Resistance had placed its trust in her, and she couldn't let them down. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts inside her. Kale gave a short nod, then turned his attention to the monitors. The rest of the team was in their respective positions, and it was time for the operation to begin. The warship would be leaving its docking station in just a few hours for a routine inspection, and they had to strike before it was too late. Leela and Kale's team, along with Zalara and her unit, boarded their ship and made their way toward the outskirts of the Council's heavily protected military zone. The ship they were on was small, fast, and cloaked, perfect for infiltrating the perimeter without being detected. As they neared the warship's location, Lila's pulse quickened. This was the point of no return. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Zalara and her team would disable the warship's communication systems and sabotage its engines, leaving it vulnerable. The chaos would buy them precious minutes, enough to execute the second phase, attacking the broadcast network. The timing had to be perfect, or the entire mission could fall apart. As the ship neared the warship's location, Kale turned to Leela. "Once we start this, there's no going back. Stay focused." Leela's eyes met his, and she gave him a determined smile. "We've got this." The Resistance team launched their attack without warning. Solara's team struck first, using stealth technology to breach the warship's defenses and disable its external communication array. Alarms blared, and chaos erupted on the flagship. The crew scrambled to identify the source of the breach. But they were already too late. Solara's team had vanished into the ship's depths, disappearing into the shadows. Meanwhile, Leela and Kel's group set their course for the broadcast network facility. The distraction was working. The Council's attention was fully focused on their prized warship, leaving the network vulnerable. But as they approached the facility, Lila's heart sank. The entrance was blocked by a heavily armed security detail. They had anticipated some resistance, but not this level of firepower. The network's guards were on high alert, clearly having received a warning about a possible attack. "We have to get past them," Cale muttered, glancing at Layla. "Now's not the time to back out." Leela swallowed hard, her fingers tight on her blaster. "We can't let this stop us." They didn't have much time. The warship team was making their way through the ship's defenses, but their window was closing. Lila's pulse raced as she formulated a plan. She knew there wasn't enough time for a full-on assault, so they would have to outsmart the guards. "Kel, we need to create a diversion," Leela said, her mind working quickly. "We can use the network's own signals against them." Cale raised an eyebrow. "How?" Leela quickly accessed the ship's systems, pulling up the facility's security protocols. "I can hack into their surveillance systems and feed them false data. We'll make it look like there's a larger group approaching from the opposite side." Cal's eyes glinted with approval. "Do it. We're running out of time." With a few swift commands, Leela infiltrated the facility systems, and within moments, the guards' monitors flashed with an image of a much larger group of attackers. It worked. The guards hesitated, unsure of how to react. That hesitation was all the resistance needed. Leela, Cale, and the rest of the team rushed forward, taking advantage of the confusion. They moved quickly, silently, using the cover of the distraction to slip past the guards and into the facility. Their mission was now in the final phase. The data they needed to broadcast had already been loaded into the system, ready to be sent out once they reached the main control room. But as they neared their goal, a loud crash echoed through the facility. It was a sound Leela had feared, a warning siren. The Council had discovered their presence. "We don't have much time," Cale shouted, urging everyone to move faster. The countdown had begun. The warship's assault would only keep the Council's attention for so long. Leela's heart raced as they reached the control room. There was no turning back now. The fate of the galaxy, and the countless lives affected by the Council's cruelty, rested on the success of this operation. As she prepared to send the data, a cold, familiar voice echoed from the doorway. "You really think you can stop us?" Leela turned, her eyes narrowing as the figure stepped into the room. It was one of the Council's most feared enforcers, and he wasn't alone the ultimate confrontation. Leela's hand tightened around her blaster as the Council enforcer stepped into the room, flanked by two heavily armed guards. The air was thick with tension. The mission had already been too close for comfort, but now they were face to face with the very people they had been fighting against all along. "You're too late," the enforcer said coldly, his voice sending a shiver down Leela's spine. "This facility is under our protection. You won't be the ones to take us down." Cale stepped forward, his eyes narrowing in defiance. "You've underestimated us for too long," he said, his voice steady despite the odds stacked against them. "We're not backing down now." Leela could feel the heat of the moment weighing on her. They were so close to sending the data that would expose the Council's crimes to the galaxy. But now, with the enforcer and his guards blocking their path, everything hung in the balance. The data had to be broadcasted, or the years of struggle would mean nothing. "We can't let them stop us," Leela whispered to Cale, her voice barely audible. "We need to finish this." Cale nodded, his hand resting on his blaster, ready for whatever came next. "Stick to the plan. I'll hold them off." With that, the team spread out, using the narrow control room to their advantage. Lila sprinted to one of the control panels, her fingers flying across the keys. Time was ticking down, and she had to send the data before they were overrun. The enforcer smirked, clearly enjoying the fear he saw in their eyes. "You think you can just hack into our systems and escape with the truth? The galaxy will never believe you." Leela's fingers danced over the console, her mind focused solely on the task at hand. She could hear the steady footsteps of the guards moving closer, but she couldn't afford to lose focus now. Then, with a sudden beep, the control panel flashed green. The data was ready. It was about to be broadcasted. But before Leela could make the final move, one of the guards lunged toward her, grabbing her arm. She struggled against his grip, but he was too strong. The enforcer moved toward her, his cold eyes locked onto hers. "Not so fast," he hissed. Kale acted quickly, firing a shot that hit the guard in the shoulder, sending him stumbling back. The enforcer growled in frustration, pulling out his weapon as he aimed at Kale. "We're not letting you win this fight," Kale shouted, taking cover behind a nearby pillar. Leela had no choice now. She had to act quickly. With one swift motion, she hit the final button, initiating the broadcast. The data began to stream across the galaxy. The truth about the Council's atrocities was now in the hands of every citizen, every rebel, and every system that had been under their oppressive rule. The enforcer's eyes widened as he realized what had just happened. No, this cannot be. Leela wasn't finished. She rushed forward and grabbed a nearby data terminal, linking it to the broadcast signal. The screen came to life, showing footage of the Council's cruelty and the oppression they had caused across countless planets. The faces of innocent beings, their suffering captured in vivid detail, were now broadcasted for the galaxy to see. The enforcer growled in fury, but there was nothing he could do. The damage had been done. The truth had been exposed. "We've won," Leela said, breathing heavily. "The galaxy will know now." But the battle wasn't over yet. They still had to escape before the Council's reinforcements arrived. The enforcer snarled, preparing to attack, but Kale intervened once more, disarming him in a swift motion. The enforcer staggered back, defeated, but his glare remained cold. "You may have won this round," he spat, "but you'll never defeat us entirely." Leela stepped forward, her resolve unshaken. "We'll make sure of that." With the broadcast sent and the data secured, it was time to leave. They had done what they came for. Now it was a matter of escaping alive. The team hurriedly made their way to the exit, taking advantage of the chaos the broadcast had caused. The Council's grip on the galaxy was weakening, and they could feel it. The resistance was gaining strength, and hope was spreading like wildfire. The enforcer's warnings couldn't change what was already happening. As they escaped into the darkness of the city, Leela felt a sense of victory wash over her. The fight wasn't over, but they had taken a critical step forward. The truth was now out there, and there was no going back. The Council's reign of terror was coming to an end. "We did it," Kale said, his voice filled with relief. Leela nodded, her heart still racing. "We did." But as they left the facility, she knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy would rise against the Council, and they would no longer stand alone. The resistance was no longer just a hope, it was a movement, and humanity had finally become the spark that would light the fire of rebellion. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity had taken a stand, and the galaxy would never be the same. The dawn of a new era. As the team made their way through the darkened streets of the city, the echo of their footsteps was drowned out by the distant hum of ships overhead. The data had been sent. The truth was out. Humanity had spoken, and for the first time in a long time, the galaxy had listened. Leela couldn't shake the feeling of victory, but there was no time to celebrate. Their mission wasn't over yet. The Council's power wasn't easily broken. They had made a major blow, but the real fight was still to come. The truth had been exposed, but the systems under the Council's control were far from ready to rise up. "Where do we go now?" Kale asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty. Leela glanced at the others. Everyone was worn from the battle, their faces marked with exhaustion, but the fire of hope in their eyes was undeniable. They had sparked something larger than they realized. The resistance would only grow stronger from here. The systems and colonies that had suffered under the Council's reign were beginning to stir, awakening to the power they had forgotten they had. "We need to regroup," Leela said. "We need to help guide the resistance, unite the systems. We can't let this be just a flash of hope. We need to make sure this truth spreads, that it ignites a revolution. As they moved toward their safe house, Layla's mind raced. The council would be scrambling to deal with the backlash of the broadcast, trying to silence those who now had the courage to fight back. But it was too late. The spark had already been lit, and soon the flames of rebellion would engulf the galaxy. The following days were a blur. Layla and her team worked tirelessly to help spread the truth, ensuring that the message reached every corner of the galaxy. They worked with rebel leaders, helping to organize coordinated strikes and gathering support for the movement. The Galactic Council's grip was weakening. Slowly but surely, systems began to fall into the hands of the resistance. News from all over the galaxy came flooding in. Colonies that had once been subjugated were rising up. The once feared council enforcers were now being hunted down by angry citizens. Ships that had once served as the council's enforcers now carried soldiers and civilians alike, all fighting for the freedom they had been denied for so long. The battle was far from over, but Layla felt a sense of unity she had never experienced before. The fight for freedom wasn't just about a few rebels anymore. It was about the entire galaxy joining together to topple the oppressive regime that had reigned for so long. They had given the galaxy the truth, and now the galaxy was responding. But the real shock came when Layla received a message from an unexpected source, a high-ranking member of the Galactic Council who had once been a part of the oppression they fought against. The message was encrypted, but the face that appeared on the screen sent a chill through Layla's body. "I know you think you've won," the voice said, "but the Council is not as fragile as you believe. There are forces at play that you cannot comprehend." Layla's heart pounded. She recognized the face of the person on the screen, an individual who had been rumored to be one of the key figures behind the Council's dark operations. This wasn't just any council member. This was the head of the shadow operations, the one who had orchestrated much of the cruelty they had fought against. "You think the galaxy will rally to your cause?" The figure continued, their voice dripping with menace. "You are playing with forces you cannot control. The council is not finished. It's just begun." Layla stared at the screen, determined not to show fear. "You've underestimated humanity. We've stood up, and we're not backing down." The figure's smirk faded slightly. "Then prepare yourself. You will regret ever challenging us." The message ended abruptly, leaving Layla standing in the dim light of the room, the weight of the threat hanging over her. She knew the fight wasn't over, but this warning was more than just a threat. It was a declaration of the Council's continued fight. She turned to Kale, her face hardening with resolve. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about the galaxy." Kale nodded grimly, his eyes locked onto hers. "We won't stop until they're defeated." The war was far from over. The final battle was still ahead, and this new threat was a reminder of just how dangerous the Council could be. But Layla felt a fire ignite within her. Humanity had stepped up, and there was no going back now. The galaxy would stand with them, and together, they would fight until the very end. It was time for the final push. It was time to finish what they had started. The battle for the future of the galaxy had just begun, and Layla would lead humanity's charge into the unknown. End of Part 7.